I feel like every day I hit the lottery. We are tasked with feeding the entire world, and we take it very seriously, and we've gotten very good at it. Dairy farmers were really the original environmentalists, taking care of the land, taking care of the soil, taking care of our cows. It makes you appreciate hard work. It makes you appreciate community. We do our best to nurture that relationship. Every Thursday, every week, anyone's welcome to come have coffee for an hour and hang out.
We built this house. We tried to make it a real welcoming place for the neighbors.
Nothing's off limits, anything can be talked about. Everyone kind of looks to help each other out. We're all in it together. When you grow up on a farm, you understand the necessities of life. We don't inherit the land from our parents, we borrow it from our grandkids.
Well, good morning, everybody. I love that little video. I hope you had a chance to see it. We don't inherit the land from our grandparents or from our parents. We borrow it from our children. What a great concept to keep in mind. And so we're going to talk about surviving increased water scarcity in California in this panel. And I just couldn't be more excited about the panel members that we have. So fasten your seatbelts. We're going to have a good discussion, I'm sure. I'm Jeff Vanden Heuvel. I'm the Director of Economics and Regulatory Affairs for Milk Producers Council, which is a dairy farmer trade association that's been around since 1949. I was a dairy farmer in Southern California for 39 years, and urbanization took the dairy. And I moved up to Central California where I got kids and grandkids and had the opportunity to work for Milk Producers Council, doing milk pricing and regulation policy and also water, particularly focusing on the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so over the last 3 years, been intricately involved in California water issues. And in the course of that, have interacted with our three panelists in different fashions. And so let me introduce them. First panelist we have today is going to be Ellen Honig from the Public Policy Institute of California. The Public Policy Institute is, kind of one of the premier California think tanks, and Ellen heads up the Water Policy Center. We are very fortunate in California to have someone of this caliber really focusing on our issues. Under her leadership, the center has become a critical source of information and guidance for natural resource management in California. And she has a wealth of knowledge and is just a terrific person as well, with a heart for agriculture and life in the San Joaquin Valley. She has really dedicated herself and her professional expertise to this. So thank you, Ellen, for that. And we're looking forward to your time with us. The next speaker we have is a very unique individual, Matt Swanson. He's a dairy farmer. He's a farmer of other things, but he is much more than that. He is CEO of Associated Feed, which is a huge feed provider in California. He has a number of other businesses and in agriculture, and also started with some software and data application businesses. And then, just to keep life even more interesting and rounded, he serves as the chairman of Riser House Entertainment, a full-service label and music publishing company in Nashville. So Matt has a wealth of information, and for some reason he accepted an appointment to the California Water Commission, which is a labor of love because it's not a labor of much else. But in that position, he has a voice, a very significant voice on water policy in California. So we're very grateful that someone with his knowledge is in such a critical policy position in California. We look forward to hearing from Matt. And then our third speaker is Jason Gianquinto. And I've known Jason probably the longest. He served on the Southern California Water Coalition with me for probably the last 20 plus years. He is the general manager of the Semi-Tropic Water District. And this is a rather unique district. And they have been a real leader in water, some of which is because they manage very difficult water circumstances. But they are a state water contractor. Most of the state water contract goes to urban purveyors, but they do have a significant agriculture component, and Jason is a key leader in that. They're a water banker, and he'll tell us more, I'm sure, about semi-tropic as we go. But from our standpoint in the dairy industry, we have a very significant dairy presence in semi-tropic. And so this was one of the places where I early went to see how is dairy going to be impacted. So Jason, we thank you too for your participation today, and we look forward to what you have to say. So without further ado, we'll turn the program over to Ellen and kick off with a question for Ellen, if I can find it. And I can't. So Ellen, just tell us what's going on in California water.
Okay, thank you so much. It's really a delight to spend time with you all. I think I'm gonna, if our friends behind the scenes can put up my slides, that's great. I'm gonna give a big picture overview on this latest drought, and I'm borrowing heavily slides that my colleague Alvar Escrivabao developed for an event that we held back in early May. So some of the data I'm going to show you are evolving, and I'll describe that as we go along. So big picture, now do I have to forward or let's see. I think maybe, let me see. Okay, here we go. Can you see the next page there? Good. Okay. All right. I have to be on the slides themselves, so I can't see the chat. But so we're in a drought again. It wasn't long ago that we got out of a historic drought, and this one is shaping up to be even more epic and historic. And so we've been looking at these issues as part of some long-term work on kind of understanding how droughts are evolving in California and how we need to respond and prepare better for them. And so what I'm going to tell you about a little bit is how this drought compares so far with the last one, but also what some of how the key issues look in the different sectors in terms of the vulnerabilities. So the last 2 years were as dry and nearly as hot as the worst years of the last drought. What this figure here shows you is 2-year periods, all 2-year periods since 1900. The ones that are in orange are from the last decade. And then the ones with the dot, the red dot in the middle, those are the driest 2-year periods in this last 120 years. And what you can see over here is that, the last drought in the middle of the last decade had some really epic heat. This is temperature along this x-axis. Also very dry, and we're almost in a similar situation. If you go back, people are talking about the 75 to 77 drought. That was another epic one, and then you have to go all the way back to the 20s for something as dry, but you can see that these were not nearly as hot. So we're dealing with hot and dry now. That's kind of a fact of droughts in California. And warm droughts are especially challenging because it just increases the thirst of the atmosphere. It increases the thirst of all of our vegetation. So basically increases demand just when we don't have the supply. It causes much greater risks for temperature sensitive fish like salmon and steelhead. And of course, as we've all been experiencing, it increases fire risk. So let's see. Here's a map to just kind of show you the geography of the drought. This drought has hit normally water-rich regions especially hard. So, California relies on water from our Sacramento and Sierra watersheds to power much of the state, including the San Joaquin Valley, where most dairy farms are located, as well as coastal communities and Southern California. And if you compare these two maps, this was the 2 years from 2012 to 2014 on the left side, and basically looking at the precipitation deficit relative to average. And then this is the most recent, these last 2 wet seasons, basically. And you can see that the whole state is affected this time, but last time we had not nearly as bad conditions up in the Sacramento. And what that basically means is that we are now in a situation 2 years in that is pretty much, it's like the 3rd year of a bad drought last time. And as we did these figures, that I would say things have gotten even worse since then. It's been dry, it's been hot, and we have been losing. The snowpack is gone. Very, very bad situation. A lot of talk about fish and ecosystems. This just gives you a little bit of a picture for a few of the northern hydrologic regions and what's happening with stream flows. This is measuring stream flow gauges. And if these are bright red or if they're orange, it shows severe or moderate drought. The North Coast, which is the area that was declared an emergency first, 2/3 of the stream gauges as of April were already severely low. In the Sac Valley, Sac River region, similar, pretty bad situation, only slightly better in the San Joaquin River region. So this is a big deal, really adding to the stress of water management. And storage. Okay, this is one of those spaces that is changing quickly, but I think I just want to highlight for you that that map that I showed you of how it's been so dry in the north. You see that in the Sacramento Valley reservoirs, which are our main reservoirs for water supply, main surface reservoirs for water supply. Already 2 years in, really getting into a situation of depleted levels. In the San Joaquin Valley, not as bad as in 2014, but not great either. But then everybody's been hearing, and there's a lot of the news stories have been talking about Southern California and how they're in relatively good shape. This is a different scale here, so there's not as much water stored, but basically urban Southern California has put a lot of investment into water storage. They have sources from the Colorado as well as from the State Water Project, as well as from local supplies, and their situation is still pretty good. So it kind of highlights some differences in geography and how the drought is being experienced differently. A lot has changed since the last drought. So what should we expect this time? What we found, and others too, looking at the last drought, that some sectors were more vulnerable than others. Cities and farms both had a lot of capacity to adapt. In cities, is a lot of it having to do with the kinds of investments they had already made in their portfolios. In agriculture, this was especially through water trading, but also through the ability to pump groundwater when surface water wasn't available. Small communities were pretty vulnerable. A lot of folks lost water supplies from domestic wells and small community wells, and freshwater ecosystems were especially vulnerable. So a couple big changes since then, and this is really important for ag especially, is that SGMA now mandates better groundwater management. That law was enacted at the height of the last major drought. There have also been some data improvements that help us to better track some things like domestic wells. So just a quick overview of the different sectors and how they're doing. Most cities are well positioned this year. Although if the drought continues, it's going to get tougher in more places. And this, as I mentioned, a lot of investments to improve supply reliability. Reducing demand has also paid off. Demand has generally not rebounded very much since the last drought. There was a big push on conservation. So a lot of cities have some extra reserve just because they've been able to store some of the water that people have not been using because per capita use has come down. We do have some real troubles in some communities already. Marin, in Sonoma, in Mendocino, and I live in the Bay Area. A lot of the Bay Area water suppliers are starting to call for extra conservation. And in Marin, which really just relies on local supplies and on the Russian River from Sonoma, there's already talk of going back to revisiting this experiment in rapid resilience that was from the 76-77 drought, where this is showing the Richmond Bridge. They put a pipeline across from East Bay Municipal Utilities District to Marin to get water to them. And they're talking about thinking about that for next year if the drought continues. Small communities, especially those dependent on domestic wells, but also small community water systems, they tend to be groundwater dependent, shallow wells. Those are the first ones to go dry during a drought. Partly just drought conditions will mean there's less replenishment of the groundwater, but also in places where ag is pumping more because there's less surface water, they can be especially vulnerable. This was a big issue in the last drought with nearly 3,000 domestic wells that went dry last time. These maps show some estimates from Alvar and another colleague, Rich Palu, looking at what might happen this year if the drought continues into next year as well. The little red dots are wells that could be impacted in the Central Valley by this coming fall, and then by fall 2022. Now, I'll just say that this mapping is something that basically represents some data improvements over time. Now it's not all perfect, but there is better data on groundwater levels and where wells are. So that's a good thing. And what it suggests also is that it's possible to be more proactive and not just wait until wells go dry and start delivering water to people in tanks, but rather to develop strategies to ensure unbroken access. Agriculture, which I'm sure is the topic that is top of mind for all of you today. We've seen some large reductions in surface water deliveries. If anybody who's got a junior right or relatively junior contract on the projects has not seen any surface water delivered or very little. Last time, water trading helped in those cases. In addition to groundwater pumping, extra groundwater pumping, water trading helped. It can help again, although everything I'm hearing is that it's hard to find the water at this point, and farmers are having to kind of pull together multiple deals to pull enough water together. Prices are high on the market, but it's still helpful. And then the other big question here is, what about groundwater? And folks are definitely going to be resorting to extra groundwater pumping. But this is now in the context of SGMA, where the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, where it's part of the law now to also address risks to drinking water systems, infrastructure, ecosystems from extra pumping. And so this is something that folks are going to have to keep top of mind. And the question here is really how to develop strategies that can allow the economy to remain robust, and the ag economy to remain robust while seeking to avoid or mitigate these impacts. And in the case of domestic wells, one of the solutions that can be really cost effective in a lot of places is either lowering the pumps or drilling wells deeper as a way to ensure kind of meeting both the drinking water needs and the ag water needs. Ecosystems, big thing, top of mind, also in terms of surface water management. They did poorly last time, and it's looking bad this time too, with really big challenges with respect to water temperature management and growing trade-offs likely. So a tough situation, and one where the strategies are probably going to have to mainly be response and rescue and things like that at this point. Rather, what we're going to have to look ahead to planning better for future droughts in order to have sort of strongholds and better strategies for managing during these times. So we've kind of I'll close with this lovely photo of the shrinking Lake Mendocino up in the Russian River watershed. During the last drought, California was slow to respond. There have been significant investments and mandates new mandates that should help this time, but it's still early days for SGMA implementation. And the real solutions are going to have to come from cooperative approaches and creative partnerships to mitigate the worst impacts. So I'm going to stop there. I hope I didn't go too long, and hope I helped set the stage for this panel conversation.
All right. Well, Ellen, that did set the stage. It's a pretty worrisome picture that we're facing. And so I'd like to remind the audience that if you have questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to get to them. So I want to encourage you to do that. So our next speaker is Matt Swanson. And Matt, can you provide an overview of the water scarcity implications for California's dairy sector and the state's efforts to address water challenges and prepare for SGMA? Matt.
You bet. Thank you so much. Great to be here. And, I think we're all very aware of the array of challenges facing us right now with these water shortages and this, ongoing in and out of, drought conditions. And we have 41 counties of the state in an emergency situation. And, these are important things. So I want to start with a perspective I have from the Water Commission. And, right now we have the attention of everyone throughout the administration and throughout the state focused on the things we can be doing to improve the situation. Where's the hope in this thing? What can we do? And I think for me, one of the reasons that it being on the Water Commission was so interesting is that Prop 1 in 2014 allocated $2.7 billion for investments in water storage projects, and as part of the water storage investment program. And we have essentially allocated that money today to 7 projects that are going to build in excess of 2.7 million acre feet of new storage. And that's a process that continues that we're overseeing and monitoring, but we hope to hear from the applicants January of 2022 that we get to see the final documents and that they're going to continue to move forward with these projects. Building water storage and having that storage available for our wetter years, I believe, is one of the probably most essential enhancements we can make as a state. Water storage investment hasn't been made in many years, multiple decades. So this is a big thing. And so January is going to be a big time. We're monitoring these along the way as they go. And that's part of what the Water Commission does. We are a repository of public comment, and we are getting updates on the state water project and these water storage investment program applicants. So to me, that's a big one, and it's something that I feel everyone is on board to see happen, and we do feel confident that these people are going to make it. From there, we're seeing opportunities to find ways when we have a wetter year. We're finding that when we have a year like we had in 18 with 180% of water flows, and now with some of this being warmer, and we're not able to generate the same snowpack. I mean, I want to say right now, snowpack is at 8% of normal for this time of year. And, what do we do? And I think the conveyance program that we've been working on is something that is going to be very helpful. And I think it ties to how do we use the water project to move water around the state, and how do we find places to put water, be it groundwater recharge, or finding places where we can let the water percolate into the aquifer. We have years where there's a vast amount of water that we could be grabbing and holding throughout the state, and so that's a project that I see very is being very optimistic for what we can look forward to. We have to be flexible. We have to find ways to take advantage of storing water in the wet years. It's just very simple. So some of my thoughts that really, from an agriculture perspective, I think we're going to need to start thinking about making sure we have productivity. One of the conversations we've had, with people that are doing permanent tree crops, we use the same amount of water if we produce 1,300 pounds of almonds or if we produce 3,800 pounds of almonds. We're going to need to focus on being productive with wherever the water goes, we want to be productive. There was a very fascinating article in the New York Times this week that talked about some of the things that people are already involving themselves in the Central Valley around fallowing land and going to solar. People that are switching crops. There's an element of looking at where are we headed here, from the standpoint of we're conserving, but conserving is not going to be enough because if we don't have water, we're going to have to rely on the storage. So I'm coming from a place of how do we, as an industry, the dairy industry has done a sensational job of reducing the amount of water it uses. It reuses a lot of water. And I think we need to look towards making those types of, investments in looking at the types of animals, the types of facilities, everything that we're doing need to be, built around the overall environmental footprint for the whole system. And I think that what we've already demonstrated with water is significant. And I think as well with a lot of our carbon technology, the dairy industry could be the most carbon neutral or carbon negative industry in the world. And so I very much applaud the ingenuity that's gone into this. And I think looking at how we're going to solve this with water, it's the same type of thinking, creative and flexible thinking. And I think the state of California is very interested in these opportunities. For me, watching these projects for water storage get built right now is the most important thing we can do, is to do everything we can to assist these applicants. It's ultimately up to them. There's an environmental burden, a regulatory burden, and a financial burden, and they have to find ways to get through it. But we're optimistic that they can, and we want to continue to see those work through the process. When it comes to really focusing on this, all of agriculture is going to have to talk about where we are. How many acres of new trees are we putting in? Where are we putting them in? How many trees are coming out? I'm interested in conversations with all the agricultural groups across the board. We need to get down. I run into people all the time that are just starting to understand the implications of Sigma. We've known about Sigma, but it's here, and we will have to become sustainable with the groundwater in the coming years, and it's a fact. And so I believe we need to talk about understanding that. I want to say our last update at the commission around Sigma would indicate that I think some of the first GSP the plans are going to come out maybe as early as this fall. And as those plans come and get approved, they're going to announce them. They're not going to hold them back. They're going to kind of announce them as they go forward. So we're going to start to see the actual implications of what has to happen, meaning how much water are we going to lose in the Central Valley to make this a reality. And I'm hoping by first of next year, we're going to have a look at most of those so we understand what the real implications are. We're already hearing many anecdotal stories of what the water, what it's going to do, how much water can be taken away. And we're going to have to really wrestle with those implications and be smart about what we do. But, what I'd also like to do is if there's any questions anyone has, I'd be happy to answer those, because it's such a huge topic that lives every day. Make sure you guys give us the information, and I'd be happy to talk about anything. It's such a huge topic, but I want to just wrap up with saying there is hope here, because we are focused on the types of solutions that bring storage and water flexibility to bring more water to the region when we have those opportunities.
Well, thanks so much for that, Matt. And we'll get into a little discussion in a bit. But next, we want to bring up Jason Gianquinto. And Jason, you're on.
Thanks, Jeff. And I appreciate the comments from both Matt and Ellen leading into this. So as Jeff discussed earlier, I'm the general manager of Semi-Tropics. So when I look at Sigma and the drought, I'm coming from a perspective as a water district manager. So just a bit about Semi-Tropic. We are located within Kern County. We cover about 220,000 acres, of which about 145,000 is in irrigated agriculture. And that includes a number of large dairies. And we are located in the Kern County subbasin, which has been declared by the state to be critically overdrafted. And of course, those problems just get exacerbated by drought. So from a Sigma perspective, first off, when we talk about Sigma, that's the law, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that was enacted in 2015. And then each basin had to create, basically develop a collective of plans called groundwater sustainability plans that were due to the state by January of 2020. And as Matt alluded to, we are expecting to get our review comments this year and hopefully sooner than next year. So we understand if there's any deficiencies or if there's any concerns the state has with our sustainability plans. So when we talk about sustainability, I wanted to refer back to this chart, and what this shows on this chart is the dots and the dark black line. That is groundwater levels over time, and so this is a graph of a well or a series of wells going back to 1994 through 2006 or 17, overlaid with state water allocations. And what it shows is that for those of us that rely upon import water as a large component of our our water supply, as we lose water supply availability due to regulation, drought, climate change, whatever, if you're going to maintain the same amount of agriculture, you are forced then to create or basically increase your reliance upon the groundwater basin. What's interesting when you look from a historical perspective, we were sustainable in a large portion of this valley prior to 2006. In 2006, basically rules changed, climate changed, and we started seeing reduced reliability of the state water project, which is also we saw on the federal projects as well. And so what that means is over time, for each acre foot of entitlement or subscription to a project, we get less water on an annual basis. So prior to 2000, the state water project, for example, was 91% reliable. What that means is that on average, we received 91% of our contractual entitlement to that project. Dropped off to 78% reliable in the early 2000s. And what's most troubling, post 2006, the reliability of the state water project has dropped below 50%. So with each drop in reliability of those projects, of course, we're forced to rely upon the groundwater basin to keep up our demand. And now we're faced with actually having to reach sustainability, which can be defined over time. Your average demand for water supplies are equal to or less than your average supply, so that you're not creating an overdraft condition, which is chronic falling of groundwater levels over time. So if you look at the supply side, and this is specific to Kern County, all of our surface water projects have been impacted in one way or another. The Kern River has been offline, not offline, but we have reduced deliveries in the Kern River due to a dam modification project, which is wrapping up. State water project and the federal project, which rely upon exports from the Delta, have been impacted because of increased regulation. We have the fishery issue in the Delta. There's a lot of controlling factors there. And then also we're seeing a change in the hydrology, less snowpack, more rainfall, and that's a concern over time. And even every time one of those surface water supplies is impacted, the demand on groundwater increases. And then when you look at the demand side, we are seeing a change in crop patterns, more permanent crops, which we're not able to lay off in dry years. That demand is there every year. And of course, from an urban perspective, we're having population increase. So our surface water supplies or water supplies are challenged, and we're seeing increased or more a firming of our demand over time. So from a landowner perspective, it's a bit of a quandary how you fit in. Because when you look at Sigma is focused upon basins reaching sustainability. It's a basin problem. That problem is to be addressed by what's called groundwater sustainability agencies, which are either counties or a combination of water districts. And underneath it, at the end of the day, it's a landowner problem. And so for a landowner to make choices long term, it's important to understand what assets you have and understand what your demand is over time relative to your supplies over time. And so what we're focused on in semi-tropic is that we have a really good handle on the supply side. We've been tracking water deliveries for since the beginning, and we recognized early on that the demand side was a bigger question. We use a lot of estimates, and so we actually embarked upon a method to use what's called remote sensing technology, or satellites, to be able to determine the evapotranspiration for every parcel of property within our district. And then we can actually show a landowner what they're consuming. And I want to say consuming, which is evapotranspiration, not applying, which would be meters on wells or surface applications. And so we wanted to focus on the ET, or the consumption, because if an application, for each acre foot of water that's applied to a field, if it's not consumed by the crop or lost to evaporation, it's still in the basin. So we wanted to focus on the net. And one of the beauties is it's also agnostic to crop. We don't really care what the crops are, because we can actually determine the consumptive use of each property. And so using satellites, there's actually a couple different satellites available, primarily Landsat 8 and Sentinel 2. So we have flyovers of satellites between every 5 days to 14 days. And then we get a snapshot of what's going on the ground. And then we can calibrate those satellite imagery with the ground-based stations, so we can determine what the actual ET is for each crop. This is a couple pictures of some ground-based stations. One on the right is a very low-cost unit that we use. And then on the left is a surface renewal station, which is the Cadillac ground-based monitoring station for determining ET. So with this information, we have a ground-based calibration network. We do our crop studies over time, and then we're able to determine the actual consumptive use of each property, which we can then aggregate to a landowner, which is the picture on the far right, the color flood, which shows greens and reds. The reds are an indication of higher consumptive use. The greens and yellows are lower consumptive use. And ultimately, what that provides to a landowner is that we can then determine or provide for them, for each parcel of property, their consumptive use on a monthly basis. And then we can compare that long term with their water supplies, which they have access to, whether it be surface water through a contract or their share of the groundwater basin. The most important part about this is for landowners to make choices, or have the best information to be able to make choices about what it would take or what it would mean for them to reach sustainability. And we recognized early on that those solutions are going to be unique to each landowner, relative to their, what crops they're growing, what their cost basis is for the property. And so we went down a path to provide the best information and not trying to force upon them a solution. So that's how we're addressing Sigma. Now, from a drought perspective, a lot of talk about drought today. How you handle a drought is dependent upon what you have done to prepare for a drought during the wet years. And it's all tied to maximizing access to surface waters in the wet years, socking them away, whether in a surface water reservoir or in a groundwater basin, so that you can draw upon them in the dry years. And I think over time, what we've seen from the surface water projects is that even during the wet years, we're not getting as much water exported as we had historically, which then creates a bigger issue during the drought years, because we haven't been able to sock or store as much away. So that pretty much wraps up my discussion, Jeff. I'm looking forward to questions and moving on from here.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jason. Just on the ET, the evapotranspiration, that was one of the things I learned in my travels as I began to look under the hood of what's going on with water in California. It's fascinating technology that can actually determine how much water is being consumed in real time by the crops in the field. And semi-tropic, you guys have really pioneered this, and now it's being adopted as the groundwater monitoring system for almost, for much of this San Joaquin Valley. So it's very, very interesting. But I would like to turn to Ellen with the first question. And, California agriculture developed over the last, in the San Joaquin Valley over the last 125 years. We developed surface water projects, in certain places, state water project, CVP, there's a lot of local projects. We never regulated the groundwater. And so we built this amazing place in the world that can grow all these different crops. I mean, it's a couple hundred different crops, but they all depend on water. And then the state in 2014, for probably very good reasons, decided to go pass a groundwater regulation. What obligation do you think comes with the state doing such a massive paradigm shift as regulating groundwater when, essentially the entire palette of agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley was developed without that regulation?
That's an easy question, Jeff. Thank you for that. It's a good question. It's an important question. I think, I'll back up a little bit and say the valley is a great place to grow stuff, in part because you can manage the water carefully, right? It's actually more challenging to grow we're able to grow the kinds of high value commodities that we're able to grow and the diverse range of commodities because we've got the sunshine, we've got the soil, and you can manage the water with precision. And you don't have to worry about, it's actually rare to get rain at times when you don't want it in the middle of the growing season, in contrast to places like the Midwest. And there's more land than there is water. There's more good land to grow stuff on than there is water. So actually, groundwater pumping has been a challenge. Managing groundwater pumping has been a challenge ever since good pumps were invented and introduced back, 100 years ago. And so the Central Valley Project came in to try to help address the groundwater overdraft issues and bring in more surface supplies. State Water Project, brought that surface water further south in the valley. Same reason. It is true. What Jason showed the graph of the 90s were the second half of the 90s were a good period. It was a wet period, but if you look sort of over long term in the valley, it is also true that it's gotten drier and regulations have increased, but there's been a long-term problem of overdraft in many parts of the valley for a long time. It's increased with climate and with regulatory cutbacks on surface water, but it's been a problem. So it's not surprising that Sigma came in the last drought because that problem started to really make itself very visible, not just with a few dry wells here and there, but also with sort of some major infrastructure damage that's actually kind of a vicious circle because the more people pump, the less surface water can get delivered now because of the conveyance being messed up by subsidence. So there are a lot of reasons to manage groundwater. The state finally came in and got sort of the authority, enough votes in the legislature to do it, but it is very much a local responsibility first. It's set up to let locals figure out how they're going to do it. What the state has been doing so far is providing funding mainly for planning and technical assistance. I would say that the projects that Matt and his fellow commissioners are aiming to get money out to, those are going to help with Sigma in terms of providing some additional storage from wet years to be able to manage in the dry years. But there's more that's going to need to be done, and especially on the conveyance side. So I was glad to see that the Water Commission was taking a big look at that. And I think that there's going to be an opportunity now with both state and federal infrastructure investments to bring in some dollars to basically help make some investments in the system that are going to be able to let us manage with this drier, more volatile climate that we've got, and get the warmer climate that doesn't have snowpack in the same way that we used to be able to count on it, get more water into the ground. And I saw in the chat, somebody asked the question, how did Southern California succeed in building storage when nobody else has? The Valley actually has made some big improvements in investment in storage underground, and Jason's sitting on top of it right now, and that's true in some other places. And there's a lot of energy and excitement about doing more of this across the Valley. And I think Sigma is going to help with that, in the sense that it helps to get the accounting set up and the measurement and sort of the incentives right. And I think in that context, the state can be a good financial partner.
Yeah, Jeff, maybe I can add too. There have been considerable investments in storage historically, and kind of the wake-up call for semi-tropic was primarily the 1991 water year, where ag on the state water contract received zero allocation. That was the wake-up call for semi-tropics landowners to say, hey, we have to do something different. And that's when we kicked off the water banking program, the groundwater banking program. And also from Southern California, given the growing populace that they have, and the recognition that the majority, if not nearly 100% of their supply, say in Southern California, is import, they also focused on the need for storage. Metropolitan's Diamond Valley Reservoir, Metropolitan's Baker was semi-tropic, so was San Diego. They all made huge investments in storage post the last drought, or the 1990s. And then luckily those facilities were online to be able to get through this drought. When you think about these storage projects, from a manager standpoint, they're always late. You always want them to have on time, because you're not sure when the next wet year is going to arrive. And if you don't have a storage facility in place and that wet year comes, you just lost an opportunity. And one thing you talked about, like with Sigma and where the changes, Helen mentioned that we've come full circle. And what's really troubling is that we really have come full circle. If you go back to Bulletin 3, the California Water Plan, which was adopted in 1957, it laid out these projects, the state and federal state project primarily, recognizing that there was an overdraft problem in the Central Valley, that industry and the communities of Southern California needed a reliable water supply, and therefore we solved that problem with physical works, capital projects, the California Water Project. Now we are regulating, we have different priorities, and those projects initiated in the 50s, 40s, and 50s are not adequate to meet the demands of today, given the increased burden of regulation and changing views of how we manage water in the state. Which leads us to, we need more storage so that we can capitalize on the very wet years when the water is in excess, and then we can reduce our demand upon those stress systems in dry years to achieve the ecosystem benefits and the other challenges. So we're really kind of in an interesting place that we saw back in the 40s and 50s, and now we've come full circle, and now we need to make another round of major capital projects, rethinking our system, making additional investments not only in storage but also in conveyance, so that we can capture those water in the very wet years and then lay off the supplies in the very dry years when it's most critical.
Yeah, that does seem to be the formula. We got to capture it when it's there, when it's wet, for when it's dry. But there have been significant policy changes, and I think, Jason, your chart about the reliability of state water project, we didn't talk about the Central Valley Project, but in 1992, the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, actually federal policy changed and reallocated significant amounts of federal water to the environment away from agriculture. But there wasn't a corresponding requirement to reduce demand. And so that demand continued. Surprise, surprise, here we are with a very significant overdraft problem. There is a question here, and I'm going to turn to Matt. Put your dairy hat on, your associated feed hat. You've got a massive investment in the dairy industry and supporting the dairy industry, and we got a lot of folks that are on the conference this morning that are kind of downstream dairy industries. They're buying milk, they're distributing dairy products. What do you think? How do you think the dairy industry is gonna in California in particular is gonna weather this very significant paradigm shift that's occurring on water in this state?
Well, thank you for that question, and I want to reiterate that. I think the dairy industry is doing some really fantastic things. I mean, I think, one of the statistics out there is there's been an 88% reduction in water use on farm. That's one of the great stories that's out there. And I think that for this industry, it's important. I'm going to say, number one, it's going to be important to be active. As I sit and look at what's going on, water is a very highly regulated. There's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of concerns. And so, like for me as a water commissioner, we know what our job is. We're not a regulator, but we're a funder. And we have to map these things out and make sure they fit with what the law states needs to be accomplished for funding to ultimately be achieved. So, I spend a lot of time listening to these different groups. It could be disadvantaged communities where we have problems with drinking water, and there's been a human right for water law passed. That is a law that's on the books that's being addressed and needs to be addressed. And I think as an industry, we need to come together and make sure that we have a plan so that we're being heard and that we're being seen as bringing solutions to the table that can work. I also believe that we have a great story that I don't think gets told very often. I don't think that people in other parts of the state, maybe a lot of people on the coastline, don't know a lot of the great work that's been done by dairy in particular and agriculture in general. When I get out and get to talk to different groups, they are amazed with some of the technology and some of the work that's been done to really improve water specifically, but also just our environmental footprint overall. So I think we need to be active, and I think we need to make sure we have an understanding of how these systems work. And, as we talk about some of what's been done, I think, some great points have been made, but these projects take a lot of money and they take a long time. So we need to start now. If we're not already rolling, we need to start now, and we need to figure out how the funding is going to work on these things. Because one thing I see in my seat at the commission is these projects only get more expensive. I never see things get cheaper. They only get more expensive. Even the projects that have already been improved are already more expensive than the day that we started, and they take time. So we need to make sure we come together as an industry. We understand that the system works in a way, and that if you don't like the way it works, you can work on changing the system or changing the laws or whatever that is. But more importantly, get involved in understanding this process and get it moving, because all of our water districts need to be on the move, actively doing something. We're in a position where we in some cases didn't do anything, and so some of these decisions have been made, and some of this can be taken out of your hands. And I think we still have a great opportunity to get out and find the best possible solutions, that can mitigate some of this.
Well, thank you for that. I will say, and I'll share a little my observation on the dairy industry. I think there has been, maybe still exists, kind of a bias that dairy is going to end up being in a really bad place under SGMA. But it's predicated on a couple of assumptions that I'm not sure are true. So I'll just take this opportunity to kind of challenge assumptions. One is that that if there's a market for water, the stuff that dairy grows, which is corn and winter forage typically, is not very as valuable as, say, almonds and pistachios. And so if it's a competition for water, those field crops won't compete very well. And then and that would be true, except groundwater is not that easy to transfer. It's already located under the ground somewhere. And as what we've seen with the development of these plans, each subbasin that's short of water, and all the ones that have plans are in critical overdraft, they're very conscious about keeping what water resources they have in their local area. So I don't think we're going to see a huge trading of groundwater occur. And the second thing is how vulnerable the competition is. I mean, competition, other agriculture. As was pointed out, trees have a hard year-round, every year demand, and if you don't have an every year supply, it's going to be very difficult to maintain that type of agriculture over the long term once these SIGMA plans take place. Whereas dairy, can grow the crops when they have the water and not grow the crops. I dairied in Chino for 39 years. We bought all our feed. We exported all our manure. We had virtually zero water consumption. So the dairy, the milking part doesn't necessarily need a large water supply in order to endure. And then the other thing is our dairy friends in the Midwest and in the plains and places that have strange weather, they have learned that they have to build multi-year inventories when you have wet years. Large silage piles. When you can grow corn, you grow it, and you just finance a much larger feed inventory. We've never had to do that in California. We're going to have to start doing that. So I'm actually relatively optimistic that the ingenuity of the California dairy industry will, I'm not saying there won't be an impact and there won't be pain and suffering along the way, but I think there is a path to the future for the dairy industry. Let me see here. The other question, and I guess I want to throw it one more time, and we're getting close to the end. But I think the conventional wisdom on financing water infrastructure has been that user pays. And part of the problem with Prop 1 that Matt you're wrestling with is that the public put up some money, but it had to be for environmental benefits. And so these project proponents have had to figure out, how to get that piece of it, because that's what the state was willing to pay for. We have a much broader view of public benefit when it comes to transportation, when it comes to education, when it comes to just about everything else with regards to infrastructure. But somehow or another, we've got this notion when it comes to water that user pays. Well, I guess. Who's the user? When mom buys an ice cream cone for Susie, is she the user? Because if there wasn't water, there wouldn't be a bale of alfalfa to feed the cow, to give the milk, to go to the creamery, to get transported, to be made into ice cream, to get delivered to the grocery store for her to buy to give Susie. And I think we really need to start talking amongst ourselves. We've done all the easy projects on water. The stuff that's left, as Matt has said so well, are expensive and difficult to do. And unless we're willing to just sacrifice a very significant portion of agriculture, I think we're going to need to broaden out our view of public investment in water infrastructure. Any final comments from any of you?
Well, I just want to say that I think, your points are very well taken. I think that I do believe in the ingenuity of the dairy industry, and I think there are opportunities here. But we're going to need to really dig in and figure out, how to go about it. But like I said, I can't stress enough how important it is for us all to get involved and understand this process and be heard in this process. And that's what we're here to do at the Water Commission, is to be able to take those types of comments. And I will say that when you talk about environmental benefit, I think public benefit is one of the senior criteria for the funding with these storage projects. I I made a comment, months ago at a commission meeting that I do believe food is a public benefit, but these are things that are important. And I do know that, at the commission, I think there's a relatively broad interpretation of public benefit, because you want to be flexible so that you can look at all opportunities to see things reach focus in line with the law. But I think we're looking broader, not more fine-tuned, in my opinion.
Great. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank you. I'm sure we could go for a lot longer, and maybe we'll have another opportunity, but it'll be good to see you out along the way. Next for the conference, we've got a session on dairy exports. You'll want to stay on for that. Sustaining milk growth and creating value for California dairy families.